In the skies over a world at war, thunder once carried a different sound. It wasn't the voice of nature, it was the voice of man, of steel, of fire. When nations clashed and skies burned, a single machine rose above the storm, built not in secret labs or palaces of genius, but in the roaring factories of a free people. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was more than an airplane. It was a symbol of how ordinary hands could shape extraordinary power. While others sought perfection in design, America sought perfection in purpose, strength, reliability, and endurance. From the drawing boards of Alexander Kartveli to the assembly lines that never slept, this was the fighter that turned production into a weapon and firepower into art. This is the story of men and machines, of pilots who fought and workers who built, bound by a single rhythm, the rhythm of thunder. Join us as we journey through the storm to uncover how courage, creativity, and unity forged victory in the skies and left echoes that still inspire the world today. The year was 1943. The world had been burning for 4 relentless years, and the skies over Europe were ruled by fear. From the fields of France to the factories of Germany, the hum of engines was the heartbeat of war. And then, on April 15th, a new sound split the air, the deep, thunderous growl of America's newest fighter. The P-47 Thunderbolt had arrived. Its mission was simple: survive, fight, and prove that the power of industry could stand against the precision of a war machine built for conquest. In the spring of 1943, Allied airmen faced a grim reality. Europe's skies belonged to the Luftwaffe. The German Air Force had mastered the art of interception. Their sleek, deadly Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts ruled the upper atmosphere, striking bombers with brutal efficiency. For months, American and British pilots flew missions that ended in smoke and silence. Then came a new presence, massive, round-bodied, and unlike anything the Germans had ever seen. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt rolled out of English airfields like a heavyweight entering the ring. It was not elegant, nor agile in the way its opponents were, but it was strong, astonishingly strong. The first test came swiftly. On April 15th, 1943, Major Donald Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group led a mission over the coast of France. His aircraft, gleaming in the weak morning sun, caught the trace of enemy fighters diving from above, Focke-Wulf 190s, the pride of the Luftwaffe. Blakesley turned to meet them head-on. The encounter was fierce and fast. The Thunderbolt's 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns roared together, a sound so deep it seemed to shake the very air. Tracers streaked outward in a solid stream of fire. The FW-190 disintegrated in the distance, one of the first victories credited to the new American fighter. For the Luftwaffe, it was a warning. For the Allies, it was hope. The P-47 was unlike anything the European theater had seen. Weighing nearly 8 tons, fully loaded, it could dive faster than any propeller aircraft of its time. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine gave it brute force, a literal storm contained within steel. It could take hits that would shred lighter planes to ribbons and still bring its pilot home. But what truly set it apart was not just the engine or its firepower. It was its philosophy. The Thunderbolt was the embodiment of a new kind of warfare, one where industrial capacity mattered as much as courage. The Americans weren't trying to build the perfect fighter, they were building the right fighter. One that could be produced by the thousands, serviced quickly, and flown by pilots trained in mass. Every rivet told the story of a nation mobilized. Women at the Republic Aviation Plant in Farmingdale, New York, worked through the night, riveting fuselages, wiring guns, and testing engines. Thousands of workers who had never seen combat were shaping the weapon that would win it. As squadrons of Thunderbolts filled the skies over England, German pilots began to realize that something had changed. They could still outturn and outclimb this new beast, but they could no longer intimidate it. The first dogfights revealed its unique strength, resilience. Pilots returned with holes in their wings, oil leaking from the cowling, control surfaces shredded, Yet the P-47 refused to die. One pilot described it as a flying tank with wings. Another said, "You could land it full of holes, and it would still bring you home." The Thunderbolt was a reflection of its makers, sturdy, relentless, and uncompromising. Throughout 1943, it grew from a curiosity into a cornerstone of Allied air power. The 8th Air Force began using the P-47 for bomber escort missions deep into occupied territory. At first, its limited range meant it could not yet accompany bombers all the way to their targets. But each mile it pushed further changed the balance of the air war. The Luftwaffe, stretched across multiple fronts and increasingly short on fuel, faced a new challenge. The Thunderbolt's heavy armor meant it could dive into combat and pull away with impunity. German pilots learned quickly, never follow a P-47 in a dive. As one German ace later admitted, it fell like a hammer, and if you followed, you died. Back in the Allied bases, stories began to circulate. Pilots told tales of crash-landed Thunderbolts patched up overnight and sent back into battle the next morning. Mechanics joked that they could repair them with a wrench and a prayer. And for the men who flew them, the plane became more than just a machine. It was a companion. Each takeoff from those muddy English runways carried with it a mix of fear and determination. The roar of the engine was a promise, a pact between pilot and machine. The pilot would bring courage. The aircraft would bring him home. By the end of 1943, the Thunderbolt had proven its worth. It had gone from untested newcomer to frontline guardian of the Allied bombing campaign. Every mission flown expanded the reach of Allied air power, and every victory in the air laid the groundwork for the liberation to come. But this was only the beginning. The battles of 1943 had shown what the Thunderbolt could do. The battles of 1944 would show what it was made for. In a world where technology and manpower merged into one unstoppable force, the P-47 would soon become more than a fighter. It would become the symbol of an idea, that the strength of a nation lies not in perfection, but in persistence. Every great weapon begins not on the battlefield, but on the drawing board. Before the roar of engines came the silence of thought, pencils scratching, minds racing, blueprints unfolding. In that silence, one man dreamed differently. Alexander Kartveli, an immigrant engineer who had fled war-torn Europe, set out to build not the fastest, nor the sleekest, but the most enduring machine of war. His creation would be a contradiction, massive yet nimble, complex yet dependable, a fighter born not of luxury or genius, but of necessity, faith, and sheer industrial will. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt begins long before it ever took flight. In the restless imagination of Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian-born engineer who understood both the beauty and brutality of machines. Having escaped the shadow of conflict in Europe, Kartveli found a new home at Republic Aviation, where the promise of American industry gave him what war had once stolen, the chance to build freely. In 1940, as Europe burned and Britain stood alone, the U.S. Army Air Corps faced a terrifying realization. Its fighters were outmatched. The P-40 Warhawk and P-39 Airacobra were valiant but outdated. America needed something new, a fighter that could escort bombers, challenge interceptors, and survive the worst the Luftwaffe could throw. Republic's previous design, the P-43 Lancer, was elegant but underpowered. Kartveli's next idea broke every convention. He envisioned a massive aircraft built around the most powerful engine available, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp. At 2,000 horsepower, it was an engine that demanded respect and space. Kartveli's solution was not to shrink the design, but to build around the engine, creating a wide, robust fuselage and a cockpit perched high like a turret. When Kartveli first presented his concept, many thought it absurd. Too heavy, they said. Too slow. Too complicated. But Kartveli saw beyond numbers. He saw an aircraft that could endure punishment, dive faster than anything in the sky, and unleash overwhelming firepower. He once said, "If it survives combat, it's fast enough." This philosophy, durability over elegance, became the soul of the P-47. Every aspect of its design reflected that belief. Its wings were thick, strong, and fitted with 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, 4 on each side, harmonized to converge at 300 yards. That was 340 rounds per gun, nearly 3,000 bullets in total. Few enemy fighters could stay airborne after one burst. Under its armored skin lay a massive turbo-supercharger system, tucked in the rear fuselage, connected to the engine by long ducts. This setup allowed the Thunderbolt to maintain power at high altitudes where other aircraft gasped for air. It made the P-47 the king of the dive, capable of plunging from 30,000 feet at speeds that bent wings and terrified enemies. But this brilliance came at a cost. The aircraft was complex, heavy, and difficult to maintain. Yet American factories and engineers, trained in the art of mass production, turned complexity into consistency. Where German engineers chased perfection through handcraft, Americans pursued reliability through standardization. It was a philosophical divide that defined the entire war. Germany built masterpieces, each aircraft a work of art. America built tools, simple, powerful, replaceable. And in a war of attrition, tools outlast art. While the Luftwaffe's Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts grew increasingly intricate, the Thunderbolt remained brutally practical. It was not meant to be pampered. It was meant to fight, break, and be rebuilt overnight. Kartvel's design choices, criticized early on, would prove visionary. The P-47 could carry over half a ton of ammunition and bombs, fly long distances, and absorb punishment that would destroy lighter fighters. Its cockpit offered unmatched protection for the pilot, with armored glass and steel plating. And, perhaps most importantly, its systems were modular. A damaged wing could be replaced. Engines could be swapped within hours. Production was streamlined so that spare parts were identical across thousands of aircraft. This was not engineering for glory. It was engineering for survival. Behind the drawings and equations were thousands of unsung minds, draftsmen, machinists, riveters, and test pilots. Each blueprint revision meant another late night at the Republic plant. Each prototype meant risking a test pilot's life to find the limits of design. By the time the XP-47B prototype first flew in May 1941, it was already a machine from the future. It weighed twice as much as the Spitfire and the Bf-109, but its performance shocked skeptics. It was fast, stable, and armed like a battleship. The Air Corps ordered it into full production even before testing was complete. As assembly lines began to roar, Kartvel's dream became America's weapon. Workers, many of them women, stood shoulder to shoulder in factories lit through the night. The same industrial heartbeat that powered cars and consumer goods now built warplanes by the hundreds. The Thunderbolt was more than metal. It was a symbol of transformation, a nation of civilians turning their creativity into defense. When the first production models reached England, the pilots who saw them were stunned. "It looks like a milk jug with wings," one said, a nickname that would become famous, the Jug. But mockery turned to respect as soon as the engine started. The Jug could dive faster, hit harder, and survive longer than anyone expected. Kartvel's ugly duckling was, in truth, a swan of steel. Throughout 1942 and early 1943, the Thunderbolt underwent countless field modifications, drop tanks for longer range, improved gun sights, and armor adjustments. Every change was the result of real combat feedback. Kartvel listened to the men who flew his creation, refining it not in labs, but through blood and experience. By the time the P-47C and P-47D rolled off the line, they represented the pinnacle of wartime design efficiency, a perfect balance between performance, power, and producibility. The Thunderbolt was no longer just a fighter. It was an idea made manifest, the idea that when a free nation unites its imagination and industry, nothing is impossible. In the years to come, other aircraft would rise, faster, sleeker, more advanced. But none would capture what the P-47 P-47 represented. That victory in war belongs not to the perfect machine, but to the right one. And for the Allied pilots flying into the heart of occupied Europe, the right one had just been born. The roar of the P-47 began long before its engines ever turned. It began in the rhythm of machines, stamping, riveting, welding, a symphony of labor that echoed across a nation. While soldiers trained and pilots prepared, another army fought in silence. The men and women of America's factories. Their weapons were not guns or bombs, but hammers, wrenches, and willpower. In those vast workshops of light and smoke, the promise of victory was forged, one bolt, one bullet, one heartbeat at a time. War, at its heart, is not only fought on battlefields. It is fought in the factories, in the quiet moments between shifts, in the sparks that fly from molten steel, in the steady hands that assemble the machines that win the fight. By 1943, the United States had become an arsenal of democracy, a phrase President Roosevelt had used, and one that became prophecy. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt was not merely about aviation excellence. It was about industrial might, about transforming production itself into a weapon. At Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant in New York, thousands of workers labored around the clock. The factory floor stretched for over 750,000 square feet, glowing with the light of 1,000 torches. Each day, new aircraft took shape, ribs of aluminum becoming wings, steel cables becoming vanes of flight. The numbers were staggering. By April 1943, Republic was producing one complete P-47 every 4 hours. By year's end, production had spread to Evansville, Indiana, where women in coveralls and goggles built engines and wings as precisely as any craftsman before them. It was an industrial miracle and a moral one. In Germany, bombers destroyed factories faster than they could be rebuilt. Slave laborers toiled under cruelty and hunger. In America, workers sang on assembly lines, inspired by the belief that their hands were shaping freedom. Every rivet was a message. You are not alone. The Lake City Army ammunition plant in Missouri became another monument to production power. By 1943, it was turning out 1.6 billion rounds of .50 caliber ammunition each year, more than the entire German aircraft industry could produce across all calibers combined. 20,000 workers labored in shifts, maintaining precision so exact that any bullet from any batch could fit perfectly into any Browning gun anywhere in the world. This level of standardization was revolutionary. While German engineers hand-tuned their weapons, American factories built them like clockwork, interchangeable, reliable, unstoppable. And this reliability mattered. A single Thunderbolt carried 2,800 rounds of ammunition. Each P-47 squadron kept 500,000 rounds in reserve. Across England, millions more were stockpiled in preparation for missions over Europe. The Luftwaffe, by contrast, often fought with 3 days of ammunition supply, sometimes less. Where German pilots counted their bullets, American pilots could fire with confidence, knowing there would always be more. This confidence, this abundance, changed everything. It was not arrogance. It was assurance. The knowledge that their aircraft would fly, their engines would turn, and their guns would never jam gave American pilots the courage to fight harder, longer, and higher than their enemies. Behind each mission was a vast, unseen machine. Trains carrying wings across the country, ships loaded with crates of ammunition crossing the Atlantic, trucks rolling across muddy fields to deliver spare parts. This was logistics as warfare, the unseen front that no enemy could bomb into submission. Women were the heartbeat of this front. They became welders, electricians, inspectors, the riveters, whose work was as vital as any general's order. In Farmingdale, women made up nearly 40% of the workforce. Their precision was unmatched. Ammunition inspectors, mostly women, were trained to reject any round that varied by more than 1,000th of an inch from perfection. Each rejected bullet was not a mistake. It was a promise that no pilot would fall because of a factory flaw. Meanwhile, The General Electric plants produced turbo superchargers for the Thunderbolt's engines, massive mechanical lungs that allowed it to breathe at 30,000 feet. These devices, each weighing nearly 850 pounds, were marvels of engineering and nightmares of complexity. Yet American engineers built them by the thousands, their tolerances perfect, their reliability absolute. To the Luftwaffe, this kind of production seemed impossible. German intelligence reports described the P-47 as industrially extravagant. They couldn't understand how such a large, heavy, and expensive aircraft could be built in such numbers. But that was the secret. It wasn't a miracle of design. It was a miracle of organization. The American system was built not on scarcity, but on scalability. Factories were synchronized like gears in a single vast machine. Steel from Pittsburgh, engines from Connecticut, aluminum from Tennessee, ammunition from Missouri, all converging into one creation of thunder. When pilots climbed into their Thunderbolts, they carried with them the strength of millions. Every worker, every factory, every hand on a wrench was part of the mission. And so, when Major Donald Blakesley and his men took their P-47s over the French coast in April 1943, they were not just flying machines. They were flying the will of a nation. In contrast, Germany's air production was suffocating under the weight of its own brilliance. Factories were scattered and bombed, supply chains fragmented, resources dwindling. Even as German engineers produced the magnificent FW-190 and the jet-powered Me-262, they could not produce enough of them, nor enough pilots to fly them. The P-47, meanwhile, rolled off the lines by the hundreds. Each one came fully armed, fueled, and ready. Each one was identical to the last, and each one represented a victory of principle over pride. Industrial democracy had triumphed over industrial dictatorship. The factories of war had proven that freedom could outbuild fear. From the thunder of engines to the hum of assembly lines, America's greatest weapon wasn't its machines, it was its people. Ordinary men and women who worked in extraordinary ways, proving that courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Some fought in the sky, others fought on the ground, with wrenches, with rivets, with unyielding faith. Together, they built not just aircraft, but a message. That unity, determination, and belief in a shared purpose can turn steel into spirit, and spirit into victory. Above the clouds, war was a storm without mercy. There was no ground to run to, no walls to hide behind. Only the endless blue and the thin metal skin of a machine between life and death. For the men who flew the P-47 Thunderbolt, each mission was a gamble against fate. They were young, brave, and afraid, not of dying, but of failing the comrades who trusted them. In those cold skies over Europe, the Thunderbolt became more than an aircraft. It became a guardian angel with wings of fire. The first time a Thunderbolt pilot saw combat, it was not courage that filled his heart. It was fear. Fear of the unknown, of the enemy, of the black smoke curling up from the fields below. But inside that fear lived something greater, resolve. By 1943, the air war over Europe had reached a deadly crescendo. Allied bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, were striking deep into Nazi territory. But they were being torn apart by German fighters long before reaching their targets. The skies over Germany had become killing grounds. The bombers needed protection, and the only aircraft capable of providing it, of flying high, fast, and far, was the P-47 Thunderbolt. When the 56 Fighter Group, known as Zemke's Wolf Pack, first entered combat in April 1943, they faced a brutal trial by fire. Their Thunderbolts were heavy, their range limited, and the enemy, the Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, were faster in the climb and sharper in the turn. But the P-47 had something no German fighter could match: raw power and unmatched durability. Major Hub Zemke, a strategist and leader of iron discipline, understood this. He told his pilots, "Don't dogfight them. Dive. Hit hard. Climb away. Live to fight again." It became the doctrine of the Thunderbolt. Boom and zoom. Strike like thunder, vanish like wind. On one early mission, Lieutenant Robert Johnson was jumped by a flight of Focke-Wulfs. His P-47 was riddled with bullets, the canopy cracked, the engine leaking oil, his control cables nearly severed. But the Thunderbolt refused to die. Johnson limped back to England, his aircraft pockmarked by over 200 hits, including 21 direct hits to the fuselage. When ground crews saw it, they couldn't believe a man had survived inside that wreck. Johnson climbed out, bloodied and grinning. "She brought me home," he said. That day, the legend was born. The Jug could take punishment no other fighter could endure. Soon, word spread through every squadron. If you're flying a Thunderbolt, you're coming home. The pilots began to trust the machine, not just as a weapon, but as a companion. They decorated their planes with names of wives, sweethearts, hometowns. They painted teeth, pin-up girls' flags, symbols of life in a world of death. Every mission began the same way. The engines roared, the ground shook, and a formation of silver wings lifted into the pale morning sky. Below them stretched the fields of England, above the unknown. The air war was relentless. German radar spotted the formations as they crossed the channel. Fighters scrambled from bases at St. Omer, Wevelgem, and Abbeville. Within minutes, the sky became chaos, twisting contrails, flashing sunlight on wings, and the terrible staccato of .50 caliber fire. The P-47's 8 machine guns spoke with fury. Each second of fire sent 120 rounds of lead into the air. When a Thunderbolt dove upon an enemy, its guns shredded wings, engines, and hearts alike. But the cost was always high. Each empty chair in the mess hall told its own story. Letters home were written before takeoff, sealed and left behind in case the writer didn't return. Still, they flew, because if they didn't, someone else would have to. By late 1943, the Thunderbolt had transformed from a high-altitude escort into a multi-role monster. It could dive bomb, strafe, and destroy anything on the ground. Trains, tanks, convoys, even fortified positions. When fitted with rockets and bombs, the P-47 became the most feared sight to German soldiers on the ground. They called it the juggernaut. From the skies above Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes, the Thunderbolt rained destruction with surgical precision. Columns of enemy armor vanished beneath its fire. Bridges exploded, rail lines melted, and supply depots turned to flame. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, began to fade. Its elite pilots were gone, its fuel reserves dwindling, its factories shattered by American bombers. And always, above the smoke and ruin, came the sound, that deep, thunderous growl of the R-2800 engine. The sound of inevitability. For the men in those cockpits, combat was never glorious. It was cold, brutal, and personal. You didn't see the enemy as a machine. You saw him as another man, fighting for his life, just as you were. There were moments of respect, even compassion, amid the chaos. One Thunderbolt pilot, after downing a German ace, later wrote in his diary, "I saw his parachute open. I was relieved. I didn't want him to die. I just wanted to live." That was the truth of the air war. Not hatred, but survival. By the summer of 1944, as the D-Day invasion drew near, the Thunderbolt had become indispensable. P-47 squadrons provided close air support for the troops landing on Normandy's beaches, strafing enemy positions and protecting the soldiers below. Pilots flew multiple missions a day, often returning with their wings scorched and ammunition spent. In those critical weeks, the Thunderbolt became the very shield of freedom, holding the line between success and disaster. When the smoke cleared, one truth remained. The P-47 was more than a fighter, it was a lifeline. Over the course of the war, Thunderbolt pilots destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft in the air and tens of thousands of targets on the ground. It became one of the most successful and beloved aircraft in history. Not because it was perfect, but because it protected those who trusted it. Each mission carried a silent prayer. Let the Jug bring me home. And more often than not, it did. For those who survived, the memories never faded. The roar of engines, the flash of tracers, the voice over the radio, "I've got your back," all became part of them forever. They had touched the edge of the sky and seen both beauty and horror. And through it all, one machine carried them, faithfully, fiercely, unbreakably. The P-47 Thunderbolt, born of steel, powered by courage, and baptized in fire. The morning of June 6, 1944, dawned gray and uncertain. Beneath the clouds, thousands of ships crossed a restless sea. Above them, a different kind of army gathered, an armada of wings. The fate of Europe hung on their shoulders. For the men of the P-47 squadrons, this was the moment they had trained for, fought for, lived for. As they roared toward Normandy, they carried not just bombs and bullets, but hope. Hope that one day, the skies they fought for would be peaceful again. By the summer of 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had become more than a machine. It was a force of nature. In the months leading to the D-Day invasion, Allied strategy depended on one goal: to cripple Germany's ability to respond. Railways, bridges, convoys, communication lines, all had to be erased before the first soldier ever set foot on French soil. And the task fell to the Thunderbolt. From bases across England, hundreds of P-47s launched daily missions over occupied Europe. They hunted trains, strafed convoys, and bombed supply depots with ruthless precision. Each sortie weakened the German war machine, cutting off fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. In the skies above France, the P-47's roar became a familiar and terrifying sound. German soldiers nicknamed it Jabo, short for Jag Bomber, the fighter bomber. Its attack runs were devastating. 8.50 caliber guns, rockets, and bombs tore through columns of armor and shredded defensive lines. Entire divisions found themselves stranded, unable to move or fight effectively. The Allied High Command knew, without air supremacy, D-Day would fail. The men who stormed the beaches needed guardians overhead, and the Thunderbolt became exactly that. On the morning of June 6, 1944, as the first landing craft touched the shores of Normandy, the sky thundered with the sound of over 13,000 Allied aircraft. Among them flew hundreds of P-47s, streaking low across the beaches to suppress enemy fire. From their cockpits, pilots saw the enormity of the moment. The ocean filled with ships, the beaches exploding in chaos, men running through smoke and fire. There was no time for fear, only action. Thunderbolt pilots dove into the maelstrom, unleashing rockets on gun emplacements, machine gun nests, and armored vehicles that threatened the troops below. Their courage turned the tide of the invasion. For soldiers on the ground, the sight of the Thunderbolt became a promise that they were not alone. Many later said, "When we heard that engine, we knew we'd live another day." In the days that followed, the Thunderbolt's missions shifted from escort to destruction. They became the iron hammer of the advancing Allied armies, pounding German positions day and night. At low altitude, where danger was constant, the pilots flew through flak so dense it seemed the air itself was on fire. Each mission demanded nerves of steel. Yet they kept going, because every bridge they destroyed, every tank they silenced, brought Europe closer to freedom. Their success was not only in the sky, but in the hearts of those they liberated. As the Allies broke through Normandy's hedgerows and advanced across France, civilians looked up and saw the silver wings flashing overhead. Children waved. Farmers cheered. They knew these planes meant hope, that occupation was ending, that liberation was near. The P-47 squadrons followed the ground troops relentlessly, from the beaches of Normandy to the fields of Belgium, through rain, mud, and relentless opposition. Their mobility and firepower gave Allied commanders a weapon unlike any before: instant air support wherever it was needed. The Thunderbolt became an angel of the front line. At the Battle of the Falaise Pocket, Thunderbolts trapped and annihilated retreating German forces, sealing the fate of the German army in France. In those fields, the Luftwaffe tried desperately to counterattack, but by now it was broken. Its pilots were young, its planes scarce, its spirit fading. The skies belonged to the Allies. By late 1944, the Thunderbolt's legend was sealed. No longer just a fighter, it was a symbol of liberation, its very shadow bringing courage to those beneath it. The stories of its pilots became folklore. Men like Francis Gabreski, Robert Johnson, and Hub Zemke achieved legendary status, not for glory, but for endurance. They flew mission after mission, sometimes 5 in a day, pushing both themselves and their machines to the edge. Many never returned, but those who did spoke of one unbreakable bond, not just with their comrades, but with the machine that carried them through hell and back. They spoke of the smell of oil and cordite, of the thunderous recoil of the guns, of the moment when fear gave way to focus. And above all, they spoke of the sound, that deep, unwavering growl that meant safety, strength, and home. As Allied forces pushed into Germany, the Thunderbolt adapted once again. It hunted trains and tanks across the Rhine, pounded enemy fortresses, and cleared the path for advancing troops. No weapon could stop its onslaught. In the final months of the war, the skies that had once been ruled by the Luftwaffe now belonged entirely to the Allies. The P-47, once doubted for its size and weight, had become the unstoppable engine of liberation. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the pilots of the Thunderbolt stood among those who had made victory possible. Their courage had written history, not with words, but with contrails across the sky. And as Europe began to heal, the Thunderbolt remained, a monument of freedom, its wings carrying the story of all who fought beneath them. It wasn't built for beauty. It wasn't built for fame. It was built to endure, and because it endured, so did the free world. The P-47 Thunderbolt had done what it was born to do, to protect, to liberate, and to bring its pilots home. Wars end, but the echoes remain. Long after the smoke clears and the engines fall silent, the spirit of those who fought still moves through time, not as ghosts, but as guardians of memory. The P-47 Thunderbolt may no longer soar above battlefields, but its roar still lives in the hearts of those who remember. It stands as a monument to courage, to endurance, to the unbreakable bond between man, machine, and mission. This is not just the story of a plane, it is the story of the human spirit itself. When the guns finally quieted in May 1945, the world was forever changed. The cities lay in ruins, the skies, once filled with thunder, were suddenly still. But amid the silence, a legacy remained. Across airfields from England to France, from Italy to the Pacific, rows of P-47 Thunderbolts stood gleaming in the sun. Engines cooling, wings streaked with oil and dust. They had carried thousands of men through the storm, across continents and oceans, through fire and fear. And now, they stood as silent witnesses to victory. For the pilots who had flown them, the end of the war brought no celebration, only reflection. They had seen the best and worst of humanity. They had lost friends, faced death, and survived against impossible odds. When they looked at their Thunderbolts one last time, they didn't see machines. They saw companions, loyal, fierce, and faithful. The P-47 had not only defended freedom, it had embodied it. As the world rebuilt, the Thunderbolt's journey continued, this time in peace. Many were sent home, dismantled, or scrapped. Others found new life in the air forces of France, Brazil, Mexico, and beyond, spreading the spirit of resilience across the globe. And yet, for those who had known its power, the Thunderbolt could never truly fade. Its story lived on in the memories of the pilots who had trusted it, and in the hands of historians, restorers, and dreamers who refused to let that legacy rust away. Each surviving Thunderbolt, lovingly restored, became a living testament, not just to engineering, but to endurance. At air shows today, when a P-47's engine starts, people still pause. The low rumble of the Pratt & Whitney are 2,800 rolls across the field like distant thunder. Children cover their ears, veterans wipe their eyes, and for a few moments, the past becomes present again. They say machines have no soul, But those who have seen the Thunderbolt fly would disagree. Because every roar of that engine carries the heartbeat of a generation, of men and women who believed that freedom was worth any price, who worked, fought, and sacrificed for a world they might never see. The P-47 is not remembered for its beauty. It is remembered for its purpose. It was heavy, ungraceful, even clumsy on the ground. Yet in the air, it was unstoppable. It did not win with elegance, but with endurance. And that endurance became its legacy, a lesson that still speaks to us today. In an age of precision and perfection, the Thunderbolt reminds us that strength lies not in flawlessness, but in perseverance. It teaches that the greatest victories come not from brilliance alone, but from courage, grit, and the will to keep moving forward, even when everything around you falls apart. Its pilots were young, many barely 20 years old. They faced odds that defied reason, yet they climbed into those cockpits day after day because they believed in something greater than themselves. They didn't seek fame. They sought freedom. And freedom, once won, carries a responsibility to remember. To remember that behind every photograph of a smiling pilot was a story of fear overcome. Behind every gleaming aircraft was an army of workers, men and women, who forged wings out of steel and faith. Behind every victory was sacrifice. The legacy of the Thunderbolt is not only written in history books. It is written in us, in every act of resilience, every stand against injustice, every moment we choose courage over comfort. The world we live in today was shaped by those who dared to fight when the sky was burning. And perhaps that is the truest meaning of the Thunderbolt, that even in the darkest storms, humanity can still find light, still rise, still roar. In museums around the world, Thunderbolts now rest in quiet dignity, their aluminum skins polished, their insignias bright. Children walk beneath their wings and ask, "Did it really fly?" And the veterans who stand beside them smile softly, answering, "Yes." And so did we. Each of those aircraft is more than metal. It is memory made visible. It carries the laughter of air crews, the sweat of factory workers, the courage of the fallen, and the gratitude of the freed. It carries the thunder of a time when ordinary people did extraordinary things. And though the world has changed, the lesson remains the same. Courage is timeless. Sacrifice is sacred. And freedom, once won, must never be forgotten. Because the sound of thunder may fade, but the spirit of those who created it will echo forever. The P-47 Thunderbolt, forged in war, remembered in peace, endures not just as a machine, but as a message that humanity, even at its most desperate, can rise to greatness. So the next time you hear the distant rumble of an aircraft, look to the sky and remember that somewhere, somehow, the legacy of thunder still flies. History is not just what happened. It is what we choose to remember. The story of the Thunderbolt is the story of endurance, courage, and the power of unity. It reminds us that greatness is not born from perfection, but from perseverance. As we look to the skies today, may we remember those who once filled them with thunder, and may we carry their spirit forward. Whether in our struggles, our dreams, or our daily battles, let us face them as they did, with courage, with conviction, and with hope. Because freedom was never free, and neither is the future. The thunder still echoes. The legacy still lives, and it lives in us.